author's style and kind of model for you how to look at a text and decipher what an author is trying to do for you as the reader by making certain stylistic choices. So the first thing that we kind of talked about earlier this week, yesterday, was this guy right here, this elements of literary style checklist. There's lots of things on this checklist that you can look for while you are reading, okay, to see why an author might have made a choice that they did. Okay, so we have, figures of speech, dialogue, point of view, dialect. Are they talking informally or formally? We have goofy things like stream of consciousness writing, where they're kind of writing directly from a character's brain, right? We don't ever think in full sentences. Usually we are thinking about 10 different things at once. At least I am. I don't know. But there's different ways that authors can help us understand what it is they're trying to say to us because they make certain choices. They want us to get a certain message, and so they make stylistic choices to get that message across. Okay. The three that we talked about in your textbook were word choice and imagery. So the words that authors choose are usually very deliberate. They do it on purpose. They choose specific words because those words bring up certain images, or they have a certain connotation that will lead you to what they want you to know. We also talked about syntax, which is the length of sentences. Are they short? Are they long? Are they full sentences, complete sentences, or are they fragments? Then if they're fragments, what does that mean? And we also talked about and syntax also covers like how the sentences are formed, right? Are they in normal everyday like verb, noun, verb, structure, or are they kind of goofed up like Yoda? You know, you will finish this paper versus finish this paper. You will, even that is a type of stylistic choice an author makes. The last one we talked about was figurative language. That includes metaphors, similes, hyperbole, personification, all of those things that authors do to help get a point across to us as the reader. So we have all these choices. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how I would personally go through and figure out stylistic choices that are in a passage. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, step one always, is to read the passage in its entirety. Okay, then we can go back and look. Jody must have noticed it too. Maybe he had seen it long before Janie did, and had been fearing for her to see. Because he began to talk about her age all the time, as if he didn't want her to stay young while he grew old. It was always, you ought to throw something over your shoulders before you go outside. You ain't no young pullet no more. You so old hen now. One day he called her off the croquet grounds. That's something for the young folks, Janie. You out there jumping around and won't be able to get out of bed tomorrow. If he thought to deceive her, he was wrong. For the first time, she could see a man's head naked of its skull. Saw the cunning thoughts racing in and out through caves and promontories of his mind, long before they darted out of the tunnel of his mouth. She saw he was hurting inside, so she let it pass without talking. She just measured out a little time for him and set it aside to wait. Okay, so we read the passage, so now we have to go back, and we're going to try and pull some of those stylistic choices that we see. So pull up things that come from that list that I just showed you. Okay. One thing that sticks out to me really clearly is the dialect that they use right here. Right here. And right here. Okay. And, what does that tell me? Well, that language to me is very down to earth. It sounds kind of uneducated. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not smart, but it means that they haven't had formal education like we would think of it, like you get in school. A lot of times when authors want to portray people, especially slaves and African Americans who have lived in the Deep South way back in the day, this is kind of the way that they describe their talking, their dialect. Okay, when we say dialect, we mean specific style of talking that comes from where you live, right? British people talk like this. That's their dialect, right? This person clearly is not from England. He's from here in America, usually in the deep south. And oftentimes, slaves and African Americans were said to talk like this. This is how they were portrayed in text. Okay. So I just make a note of that here. I just say dialect, tells me that maybe they're uneducated, possibly Southern. I don't know why that's there. Uneducated, possibly Southern. And I said down to earth because I feel like this is, this is a very kind of humble, homey kind of way to speak. Okay. Okay. And another thing that I noticed, one of our stylistic choices can be point of view. This is obviously in third person point of view. We don't have any particular character speaking. However, our third person narrator is kind of taking all of this information from this person Janie, right? We seem to be seeing things from her point of view. So we may want to make a note of that, right? So point of view is third person, but we are kind of seeing things through Jamie. But seeing through Janie's eyes. Okay. And she's obviously talking about this person here named Jody, who I assume is a man, probably her husband or something like that. Another thing that I noticed stylistically was the use of sentence fragments. So like right here and right here. Okay. That tells me that this isn't, it's not like somebody's just sitting there reading from a book, right? It kind of sounds like they're reading it right out of somebody's head, right? They're giving us the thoughts that were running through that person's head the way they ran through it, right? They didn't mix it up or mash it up at all. Okay, so fragment, and I'm going to write thought process because we don't think in a straight line a lot of times. We don't think in complete sentences. We kind of tweak and push and pull and go in 5 different directions at once. This kind of sounds like what she's doing. Kind of like the narrator keeps adding on to this thought process that Janie is having about Jody. Okay. But without, going right inside Janie's head and saying Janie thought this, right? They don't have to do that because stylistically they have chosen to use sentence fragments and things like that. So we can kind of tell that this is happening in Janie's head. The one other thing that I noticed was this figurative language down here. And I think it's a really beautiful line. I really like it. I've never read this book before. It's called Their Eyes Were Watching God. But it sounds like a really cool read. I like the style. I like the language choices. But here it says, for the first time, she could see a man's head naked of its skull. So she can see what's going on inside Jody's head, as if he didn't have a skull, as if she could just crack it open and look right in and see his thoughts. Saw the cunning thoughts race in and out through caves and promontories of his mind long before they darted out of the tunnel of his mouth. So she's making a metaphor here, and she's comparing Jody's mind, his brain, his thoughts, to a dark cave with lots of cliffs, right? So I'm just going to write that in. Metaphor, comparing Jody's mind to a dark cave. Now, the other question we have to ask is, what does that tell us about Jody, or how she views and understands Jody? Well, if she's comparing it to a cave, caves are dark, kind of scary. Sometimes you don't really know what's in there. Kind of not necessarily empty, but easy to get lost in. They're deep. right? So maybe she's saying that, there's a lot going on with Jody under the surface that people don't see. And she says she's seeing these thoughts race through his brain before they come out of his mouth, right? So maybe there's a lot more to Jody than he lets on. He's not going to tell her that he is sad that she's staying young, that she's younger than he is and he's getting old. But the way that he fusses over her, telling her to get off the croquet pitch and to, calling her an old hen, that kind of indicates that he wants her to stay with him, that he wants her to be old like him. He's feeling kind of insecure, but he'd never say that out loud. So maybe we'd say, maybe Jody is deeper than we originally think. Okay, cool. Okay. So now what I need to do is I need to take all of these things that I've noticed, okay, and I need to kind of back up and see them as the full picture. Why is the author making these particular choices? What is she trying to lead me to? And so I would argue, okay, if we want to kind of write this down here, okay, they do a really good job of kind of describing it down at the bottom of the page, but I want you to see me actually write it out. I would argue, okay, since we're seeing this in third person, but we're looking through Janie's eyes, we're seeing things from her point of view, her perspective, because we're using this Southern dialect, because we're being informal, because we are using sentence fragments instead of whole, complete sentences, and because we are clearly using a metaphor to describe Jody's mind the way Janie sees it and perceives it, I would argue that all of these things put together would indicate that the author is trying to get us close to Janie and to put ourselves into her mindset and perceive the story from her eyes as much as possible. Okay, that the purpose of all of these stylistic choices is to get us to see eye to eye with Janie, to sympathize with her, to empathize with her, and to experience the story really from her mindset. Okay, so I'm going to write that in here. I'm going to mention the elements that I saw, the stylistic elements that I saw, and then I'm going to draw my conclusion. Okay, so the author's use of an uneducated, humble dialect, descriptive, oh, I don't want to talk about the metaphor yet, sentence fragments, and descriptive metaphors about the inner workings of Jody lead me to believe that she wants us to experience this story from inside Janie's head. Her thoughts and feelings about Jody are the focus of the passage. Okay? And there you go. So you've taken all of these wonderful things that you're seeing in the passage, in the text, and you are pulling them all together and making a clear, definitive claim about what you think the author is trying to get you to do. Okay? And that's how it works. Okay? And we're going to keep practicing this. We have a little activity that you guys are going to do tomorrow with this. You'll work with a partner, you'll get some passages, and you will be pulling out these ideas for yourself. Okay? And I won't leave you loosey-goosey. I've given you the stylistic element that I want you to focus on. So that way you can look in the text for that element specifically and tell me what the author's trying to do by using that style element. Okay? If you have any questions, let me know. You can come back to this video as often as you want. We're going to keep talking about style a little bit longer before we write our common assessment essay. And hopefully you guys will get a good grasp on it so you can talk about it in high school, because they ask you a lot about that in high school or on your state tests. But you won't be so confused by style anymore. Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Bye.